rich in land, that it will be our strength. We should focus on helping these Filipinos. Ang taon pa yan, wala lang sasakain dito. Puro mga pabrika na dyan.
Halos wala na rin sa mga anak ng mga magsaka ang gustong sumunod sa mga yapak nila. Takot ang Department of Agrarian Reform sa posibleng food shortage kung magpatuloy ito.
7.6 million households ang nagsabing nakaranas sila ng gutom.
More lands may be distributed to beneficiaries if agrarian reform bills in Congress will be passed into law.
I am Jennifer Odagtin.
I am Maika Mustafa.
Hi, I'm Erlyn Macias Tano.
I'm Hashim C.
After discussing the topic, we should be able to define what is agrarian reform, explain briefly the history of agrarian reform in the Philippines, and understand what is Comprehensive Agrarian Reform Program or CARP. To give you a background of the discussion, you must be familiar that agrarian reform is a complex and controversial program which meets a lot of oppositions from different parties. The agrarian problems in the Philippines have been deeply rooted in history for centuries. In the last 8 or 9 decades, the implementation of agrarian reforms proceeded at very slow pace due to factors of political will. Even thousands of hectares have already been redistributed to small farmers, and through President Duterte's aggressive desire to implement the CARP, in general, the redistribution of land is still very slow. In the subsequent discussions, salient points on agrarian policies in the Philippines since Spanish era are presented. Let's try to notice some information that caused the problem and why until now land dispute remains one of the social issues in the Philippine society.
So now we will be talking about one of the most important thing in Philippine history, which is the agrarian reform. For a long period of time, the agrarian system of Philippines was being controlled by the large landlords. The small farmers in the Philippines were struggling for their right to land and other natural resources. So what is agrarian reform? Agrarian reform defined as the rectification of the whole system of agriculture. It is concerned with the total development of the farmer's economic, social, and political transformation. It focused on the political and economic class, nature of production and distribution relations in farming and related businesses. It involves measures to modernize agricultural practices as well as measures to improve the living standards of the entire agrarian community. The Americans considered it as the principal cause of revolts in the Philippines during colonial times. After witnessing the defects in land ownership, Americans have acknowledged the need for reform. Legislation was one of the measures taken by Americans to remedy the defects. The Philippine Commonwealth government followed this as policymakers recognized the importance of laws in protecting the rights of the farmers. In the Comprehensive Agrarian Reform Law of 1988, Republic Act No. 6657, agrarian reform is defined to mean the redistribution of lands, regardless of crops or fruits produced, to farmers and regular farm workers who are landless, irrespective of tenurial arrangement, to include the totality of factors and support services designed to lift the economic status of the beneficiaries and all other arrangements alternative to the physical redistribution of lands, such as production or profit sharing, land administration, and the distribution of shares of stock, which will allow beneficiaries to receive a just share of the fruits of the lands they work.
The 16th and 19th century land ownership system. In the 16th century, when the colonial government of Spain came, they introduced a system which is the Pueblo agriculture, wherein a native rural communities were organized into pueblo. Awarding of tracts of land were ranked to religious orders, encomenderos, and repartimiento. Under this system, they practiced no sharecropper class or landless class. By the 19th century, hacienda system were developed as the new form of ownership. and by the 1860s, landowners were required to register their land holdings. Thus, land registration and claims in other people's name forced the peasant out of the land, the very reason why the people of the Philippines revolt. Until the Philippine Revolutionary Government of President Aguinaldo declared the landed estate, including friars, as government property to redistribute them. But that promise did not happen.
Ownership under Americans. After the Spaniards' colonization, the Americans did a changes to bring back the titles or the lands to the Filipinos. They make many rights for all those Filipinos, not also Filipinos, but also to those people that have rights or own land. Section 15, Philippine Bill of 1902, rights to having an own land not exceeding to 16 hectares in each person. But in a corporation, it must be at 1,024 hectares limit only, in which Americans also make a Philippine Commission Act number 496, which is it provides to the titles to the Philippine Islands, in which it also includes the Public Land Act of 1903 that regulates the relationship between tenants and the landowners, which is the other term of this is the homestead system. But in this proposal, many landowners and tenants are abused their rights about the lands, which is in the farmers, they have no rights for their works under the land of the tenants and the landowners. So because of that, the Sakdal uprising or a common rebellion been happen to oppressive the tenancy situation during May 2 and May 3, 1935. So to avoid that or to resolve that, President Quezon make a decision to bought haciendas and created a NAREC, which is the National Rice and Corn Corporation, to settle these all problems between the land owners and the farmers.
Agrarian reform after World War II. After the World War II ended is the establishment of the Philippine independence in 1946, but the problems of land tenure remained. Thus, a lot of changes, revision, and enacted laws happened for the succession of the agrarian reform. From President Rojas signing a law which is Republic Act number 34, established 70 to 30 sharing arrangements regulating sharing tenancy contracts. President Quirino's replacing the National Land Settlement Administration with Land Settlement Development Corporation, and to the abolishment of it by President Magsaysay to establish the National Resettlement and Rehabilitation Administration to resettle the dissidents and landless farmers. President Magsaysay's Republic Act 1199, Agricultural Tenancy Act, protects tenurial rights and enforces tenancy practices. This law created the Court of Agricultural Relations in 1955 to improve tenancy security, fix land rentals, resolve land disputes filed by peasants' organizations. While the Agricultural Credit and Cooperative Financing Administration's purpose is to provide warehouse facilities and assist in marketing products, spearhead establishments of agricultural and industrial bank to assist in applying for homestead. On the other hand, Nara convinced Haste rebels to resettle in areas to restart peaceful lives. Despite these attempts of three late presidents, the resettlement were a failure due to the lack of funds, an adequate support system, and landed elite did not fully cooperate.
President Macapagal Agrarian Reform. During President Macapagal term, he proposed some Republic Act and some articles to make this ease about between the issue of the lands of tenants and the land farmers. And one of that is the Republic Act number 3844, which is the Agriculture Land Reform Code, that states to abolish the tenancy and the focus of the goal of the shared tenancy. To resolve this, President Macapagal prescribed some programs to promote the relationship between the tenants and the land farmers, in which the tenancy allows the tenant and the give farmers a rights to the land, in which the tenants have his own tenancy and the farmers give his own rights.
President Marcos Agrarian Reform. Presidential Decree Number 27 Code of the Agrarian Reform of the Philippines, or the decreeing emancipation of tenants from the bondage of soil, transferring to them the ownership of the land they till and providing the instruments and mechanism therefore, is signed on October 21, 1972 by President Marcos. It states there that, number 1, it shall apply to tenant farmers of private agricultural lands devoted to rice and corn under sharecrop or lease tenancy system. Number 2, tenant farmer shall own family size of 5 hectares of if not irrigated and 3 if irrigated. Landowner may retain not more than 7 hectares. Value of land shall be equivalent to 2 1/2 times the average harvest of 3 normal crop years immediately preceding the promulgation of the decree. Total cost of the land including 6% interest per annum shall be paid in 15 years of 15 equal annual amortization. In case of default, amortization must be paid by the farmers cooperative. No title of lands be issued unless tenant farmer is a full-fledged member of a cooperative. Land acquired by this decree is non-transferable except by hereditary succession. Landlords change crop to be exempted from the program. But because of the inherent limitations of the law in actually giving the lands to the farmers, Presidential Decree Number 27 ultimately failed in giving social justice to the poor peasants.
Under President Corazon C. Aquino, between 1986 to 1992. During the term of President Corazon Aquino, she made a big impact to the agrarian reform or the agriculture process of the Philippine island. One of these is to establish the 1987 Constitution, especially the Section 21 under Article 2, which is the main goal is to promote the agrarian reform of the Philippines. By the help of that, she also promoted and made a decision like the Republic Act number 1657 to build an agency to build a program that helps the agrarian reform to the Philippines. She built the Comprehensive Agrarian Reform Program, which promotes the justice and industrialization full land of the Philippines. And after that, she also managed the other orders under the 9787 Constitution, which one of these, it states that justice for the farmers, from the unvalued stocks, which is she gave a rights or the full loan ownership about that land from the beneficiaries. And the next is the Proclamation number 131 under the 1987 Constitution. In this order, she focused more and more about the agriculture and the agrarian reform order of the Philippines, in which she wanted to focus the agriculture to make the more industry process to the improvement of the Philippines during that day. In this order, she focused more and more about the agriculture and the agrarian reform order of the Philippines, in which she wanted to focus the agriculture to make the more industry process to the improvement of the Philippines during that day. But before that, she needs to have a managed corporation to manage this all problem, in which under the executive order number 405 under the 1987 Constitution, she gives the permission, she gives a rights to the land bank.
President Fidel V. Ramos, 1992 to 1998. When President Fidel V. Ramos formally took over in 1992, the public have lost confidence in the Agrarian Reform Program. His administration committed to the vision, fairer, faster, and more meaningful implementation of the Agrarian Reform Program. He enacted the following laws. First is the Republic Act number 7881, which is in order to safeguard the right of the regular fish pond or prawn farm workers under the incentive plan. The books of the fish pond or prawn farm owners shall be subject to periodic audit or inspection by certified public accountants chosen by the workers. In general, private agricultural lands owned by individuals or entities actually directly and exclusively used for prawn farms and fish ponds as of March 12, 1995 shall be exempt from the coverage of CARP. Second is the RA 8532, an act strengthening further the Comprehensive Agrarian Reform Program or CARP by providing augmentation fund therefore, provided an additional 50 billion pesos for CARP and extended its implementation for another 10 years. President Joseph E. Estrada from 1998 to 2000. Era para sa mahirap. This was the battle cry that endeared President Joseph Estrada and made him very popular during the 1998 presidential election. During his administration, President Estrada launched the Magkabalikat para sa Kaunlarang Agraryo or Magkasaka. The DAR forged into joint ventures with private investors into agrarian sector to make FBIS competitive. The Estrada administration widened the coverage of the Comprehensive Agrarian Reform Program to the landless peasants in the countryside. The latter's administration distributed more than 266,000 hectares of land to 175,000 landless farmers, including land owned by the traditional rural elite. However, the Estrada administration was short-lived. The masses who put him into office demanded for his ouster. President Gloria Macapagal Arroyo, 2000 to 2010. The Agrarian Reform Program under the Arroyo administration is anchored in the vision to make the countryside economically viable for the Filipino family by building partnership and promoting social equity and new economic opportunities towards lasting, peace, sustainable rural development, such as credit assistance, extension services, irrigation facilities, roads and bridges, marketing facilities, and training and technical support programs. She passed Republic Act 9700 last August 7, 2009, the Comprehensive Agrarian Reform. She also worked with the program extension with reforms extending the deadline of distributing agricultural and to farmers for 5 years.
President Aquino III Agrarian Reform. Under the administration of President Aquino III, he vowed in his 2012 SONA that before he finishes his term, he would eventually complete the Comprehensive Agrarian Reform Program, a centerpiece program of his mother, late President Corazon Aquino. He distributed family-owned Hacienda Luisita in Tarlac. Apart from this, he did promise to complete distribution of privately owned lands of productive agricultural estates in the country that have escaped the coverage of the program. Various programs, projects, and systems were created and developed. The Agrarian Reform Community, Connectivity and Economic Support Services, Agrarian Production Credit Program, and the Legal Case Monitoring System for the purpose of the success of the CARP. Despite this platform of the Aquinos, people says that they are the worst amongst all at administering the agrarian reform.
Under President Rodrigo Roa Duterte, he managed a program which is the Aggressive Land Reform Program that prioritizes and provision the support service, the land distribution. So because of that, DAR launched a second phase of the land reform under the CARP, in which President go to CARP to give the landless farmers a titles from the undistributed lands. Also under by Duterte, CARP made a place. Also under the term of President Duterte, the CARP gives a land to the Boracay within 400 hectares. And to avoid the corruption between these projects, DAR created an anti-corruption task force to know the big budget and the allegations of the programs. Also, DAR pursue a Oplan Zero backlog to fast-track the CARP, in which it is a joint force to maintain the zero backlog from 2019 to 2020.
Comprehensive Agrarian Reform Program. So, Comprehensive Agrarian Reform Program of 1988, also known as CARP, is a Philippine state policy that ensures and promotes welfare of landless farmers and farm workers, as well as elevation of social justice and equity among rural areas. CARP was established by the Comprehensive Agrarian Reform Law of 1988. It was enacted by 8th Congress of the Philippines and signed by President Corazon C. Aquino on June 10, 1988. It aimed for a nation with equitable land ownership and empowered agrarian reform beneficiaries while at least improving social lives. The Comprehensive Agrarian Reform Law, or CARL, enacted in 1998, broadened the scope of rural land reform by covering private agricultural lands regardless of corps or tenure arrangements. Infrastructure, capability building, and credit marketing assistance are among the services provided to agrarian reform beneficiaries. Lands were distributed within a period of 10 years during President Ramos' administration, and then again extended for 5 years until 2014 under the Comprehensive Agrarian Reform with Extended Reforms Carper Law. Even though the 2014 deadline was missed, President Benigno Aquino III vowed that the distribution will be completed before the end of his term in 2016. By the end of 2015, about 88% of the program's land, 6.9 million hectares out of 7.8 million hectares, had been dispersed. Under the CARP and CARPER, farmer beneficiaries are granted 1. Absolute ownership in the form of emancipation patents upon full payment of amortizations, or 2. Absolute ownership in the form of certificate of land transfer or certificate of land ownership for those still completing payments. However, for a period of 10 years, CARP prevents reform beneficiaries from selling or transferring their lands except through hereditary succession or for sale to the government, the Land Bank of the Philippines, or other qualifying reform beneficiaries. Agrarian reform beneficiaries of large corporate farms are given stock ownership under the stock distribution option. Farm workers in the areas where landowners have retention limit and in private agricultural properties that the government has yet to acquire are given leasehold rights with 75:25 split in favor of the farmer lease. In summary, instead of turning over properties to the government, the law allowed corporate landowners to divest a portion of their capital stock, equity, or participation in favor of their employees. Alienable and disposable lands, agriculture lands, and reclassified lands are privately owned lands are subjected to number 1, purchase with vests ownership, or 2, lease with vests only the right to occupy and use for the period agreed upon. Under the law, therefore, landowners were paid by the government through just compensation and allowed to retain not more than 5 hectares of land plus 3 hectares for each child of the landowner, provided the child is at least 15 years old and is actually tilling the land or directly managing it, and at 3 hectares for the reform beneficiaries. As of 2003, the size of privately owned land classified as alienable and disposable were 64.8%.